The building was always alive with chatter of engineers and executives moving fast with their laptops and polished shoes yet in the corners. And along the silent hallways there was one man who never joined their rush. His name was Tom. He carried a broom and a bucket and wore a uniform that made him blend into the background to most people. He was invisible. They saw him only when the floor shined or the trash bins emptied. Tom's days were simple. He moved from one office to another, sweeping, mopping, polishing, but what nobody noticed was the way his eyes lingered on the open whiteboards covered in equations, the way he paused near desks full of half-built circuits and screens flashing lines of code. He never said a word. He just moved on quietly, but his mind was never idle. At night when the building emptied and silence returned, Tom stayed behind. He had permission to work late hours, and no one questioned him. After all, who cared what a janitor did once the day was done? But those late hours held his secret in the supply closet tucked behind boxes of soap and paper towels. He kept a small table scattered with wires, scraps of metal, and notebooks full of sketches. No one had ever seen his broom leaned in one corner while he leaned over his secret projectum. Had no formal degree, no fancy diploma to hang on the wall. He had grown up in a small town fixing broken radios and building toys out of scraps. When other kids played ball, he dug through junkyards finding pieces that could be shaped into something new. Life had not been kind. Jobs were hard to find. And eventually he took this janitor work, but his hunger to build never faded. He simply built in silence. Workers in the building passed him every day. Some joked about him, others ignored him completely. Once a young intern left her phone on the counter while Tom polished the floors. She laughed with her friends and whispered loud enough for him to hear. Imagine the janitor trying to design something. He probably thinks he can build a spaceship with a broomstick. Tom only smiled. He had heard worse before, and he had learned long ago that being underestimated was his greatest shield. Late one evening, while the rain tapped against the windows, Tom sat in that closet and adjusted the small device on his table. It looked like nothing more than a metal box no larger than a lunch container. Wires spilled out, and a faint blue light glowed at its center. To anyone else it looked like junk. To Tom, it was a dream coming alive. He tightened the screws, checked the readings in his notebook, and whispered almost like a prayer, "Tonight it will work." But before he could test it, footsteps echoed down the hallway. He quickly covered the device with a rag and leaned casually on his broom. The security guard peeked and nodded and left. Tom's heart pounded, not from fear of being caught for building on company property, but from the weight of what he was about to attempt. For months he had been working on this quietly, without tools beyond what he scavenged from trash bins, old monitors, spare cables, broken sensors, while others tossed away what they called useless. He collected each piece with patience, assembling them into something greater. He had noticed patterns that the engineers themselves overlooked, connections so simple they were dismissed, yet Tom saw elegance in simplicity. Still, the question hung heavy in the air: how could someone so ordinary create something extraordinary? Who would believe it? Even if he succeeded, the world saw him as a man with a mop, nothing more. At night, Tom stared at the small glowing device and asked himself a question that had haunted him for years. Was it foolish to keep chasing this vision, or was it destiny that someone like him, overlooked, unseen, could hold the key to a breakthrough that might shake the world? The building slept. The city outside roared with traffic and neon lights. But in that broom closet, history waited, quietly suspended. Between failure and revelation, Tom reached out, placed his hand on the switch, and whispered one last time, "No one will believe this until they see it with their own eyes." And with that he flipped the switch. Blue glow steadied like a heartbeat, and the box in the broom closet gave off the soft hum of something alive. Tom held his breath. He watched a small plug-in power meter he had borrowed from maintenance. The numbers began to fall, not rise, and his old laptop beside the box stayed fast and smooth even as he opened heavy programs that usually made it wheeze. He whispered one word: final. The device looked simple, a palm-sized metal shell, a single dial, a tiny switch. Inside it was nothing exotic, no rare elements, no secret factory parts, only timing coils, a cheap crystal, a strip of reused board, and wires he had straightened with pliers. The idea was the real invention. He called it the pulsar helper, that sat between a power source and a computer or server or even a phone, and taught the machine to rest in tiny perfect moments so short the human eye could not register them. He had learned the trick long ago, watching metronomes on a wooden table sync to each other. When they shared the same surface, it was not magic. It was timing and kindness to wasted energy. Most machines wasted energy in the gaps when nothing useful was happening: a web page loading, a database waiting, a chip stalled. For a sliver of time, the pulse listened for those slivers and nudged the machine to take micro rests, then woke it up in rhythm again. It did not slow work. It made the idle space gentle, and in return the meter showed the truth. The old laptop used less power and ran cooler, and the fan barely whispered. Steps came again. In the hall this time it was Ben the night guard with a thermos of coffee and an easy smile. He had seen Tom working late for months, never asked too much, just nodded and kept moving tonight. Ben stopped at the half-open door and tilted his head. You building a radio in there, Tom? Tom thought of all the years he had been laughed at and decided he was done hiding. Want to see something? He asked. Ben shrugged and stepped inside him, unplugged the laptop. The hum stayed steady because the pulse sat between the wall and the machine. He turned the dial and pointed to the meter. You see the number here? Ben leaned closer, trying to hide a grin at the janitor with gadgets. Then the numbers fell again while the laptop screen stayed bright. Ben's smile faded. Wait, how is it doing that? Tom kept his voice even. It teaches the machine when to breathe. It is nothing fancy, just tiny rests in all the empty spaces. We ignore. Ben blinked. You telling me it runs the same but uses less juice? Tom nodded. Try it yourself. Ben was the kind of man who respected an honest test. He opened a video file. He opened 10. He dragged them across the screen. The laptop kept moving like a calm river. The meter kept drifting down, not up. Ben set his thermos on the shelf and whispered, no way. He looked at Tom like a new person you need to show someone who builds things for a living. They found Kate down the hall, a junior engineer. Always the last to leave. She had a rough bun and ink stains on her fingers and a brain that liked puzzles. When Ben waved her over, she frowned but followed, and when she saw the box, she crossed her arms. Another free energy trick. Tom shook his head. It is not free energy. It is stolen slack. He offered the plug and the meter and stepped back. Kate loved the challenge. She ran the laptop through tests. She turned off Wi-Fi, turned it on. She heated the CPU. She cooled it with a desk fan. She watched the power number fall and rise and then fall lower than it had any right to go while performance stayed steady. Her face changed in small flips of emotion. First doubt, then irritation, then a tiny dangerous curiosity. She pulled a notepad. What does it do? In plain words, Tom spoke the way he had taught himself to think. Simple words, slow ideas. The pulse listens to the clock of the machine. It listens to the rhythm of work and the rhythm of nothing, and it taps on the shoulder during nothing, saying rest now, wake now. And those rests are so small they do not hurt anything, but they add up, and the heat is less and the bill is less and the battery lives longer. And the room is quieter. Kate stared at the box and then at Tom. Who are you really? He smiled. Only the janitor who watches the whiteboards when he mops. He took the box to a lab bench and put it between a test rig and a power supply. Kate measured with tools Tom had never touched. She used a thermal camera. The colors told a story. Blue, where there had always been yellow. Green, where there had always been orange. She whispered numbers: 12%, 15%, 19 on peak idle mix. She shook her head and laughed once, not mocking but amazed. Simple, she said. It is so simple that it makes me angry. We chased this with code and heavy firmware, and you did it with timing and a cheap crystal. Word traveled faster than Tom would have chosen. The next day, a small circle formed around the lab. To interns, a product manager, a sleepy architect called in early. They all wanted a look. The first reaction was disbelief. They hunted for flaws. They said it must throttle performance. They said it must corrupt timing. They said it must break under load, and then they ran load. And nothing broke. The room warmed with excitement. The interns texted friends. The product manager rehearsed how to pitch this to her boss. The architect, who had seen too many fads, rubbed his eyes and whispered, if this holds at scale, it cuts our server bills so much that finance will write poetry. Explained the core problem in the simplest way. Most of our machines spend a lot of time waiting, and we pay for every second of that waiting with heat and electricity and frustration. The pulse does not make the machine faster. It makes the waiting cheaper and calmer. It solves waste, and waste is everywhere. By afternoon, the company's small data room offered a bigger test. They put the pulse before a rack of dev servers, only for an hour, only on safe workloads. The meter at the room entrance liked to creep up as the workday got busy, but the curve was different now. It rose less, it dipped more, it carried a new softness. The operations tech, who watched the chart every day, shook his head and said, my graph never looks like that. What did you people do? There was pushback too. A senior engineer said, this cannot be safe. If it is simple, we would have done it years ago. A finance analyst muttered about compliance and warranties. A manager asked, who approved a janitor to wire anything into company power? But the live numbers argued back, and the servers kept their pace, and the hum in the room felt like steady ring. Kate pulled Tom aside and spoke with a new kindness. You know, this is bigger than us, bigger than this building, she said. What do you want to do with it? Tom thought of the closet and the stack of notebooks of the people who had laughed and the long nights of doubt. I want people to have it, he said, cheap and clear, so they can save energy without learning a new language, so small shops can cut their bills, so phones can last longer, so data centers can breathe. She nodded and said, then we need a real unveiling. They planned a small demonstration for the next morning in the cafeteria, where the company sometimes showed prototypes. They would bring two identical laptops, to meters, to video loops, one with the pulse, one Without they would let people touch the cables, they would not hide a single thing. They would tell the story of metronomes on a table and a broom leaning in a corner and how listening carefully can change the shape of waste. That night, Tom went back to the closet not to hide, but to prepare. He polished the metal box until it lost its scuffs. He taped a paper label on the side with a name written in pencil. The pulse. He packed his notebooks into a plastic bag. He set out to extra coils in case something went wrong. And he sat for a long quiet minute with his hands on the table, grateful and afraid. Then he stood up and turned off the light. Morning came with a smell of coffee and the murmur of doubt and curiosity. People gathered. The 2 laptops sat ready. The meters faced the crowd. Kate spoke first, short and clear. This is a timing helper. It does not add energy. It does not steal performance. It teaches machines to rest in micro moments that we waste. And then Tom, with his uniform and soft voice, told them how he had watched this building for years. How he had listened to the hum of fans like a choir, always singing even when no one was working. And how he wanted to teach that choir to breathe. Of screens lit, the videos looped, the meters told their plain story, and in a single breath the room flipped from disbelief to a rising excitement that felt like wind starting under a door. Someone clapped, then many did, and someone else yelled, "Run the battery test." And someone else said, "Take it to the server room again," and the architect said, "Give me 10 of them." Tom looked down at the little box he had built in a closet and felt a quiet joy. That was not pride, but the cafeteria demonstration should have been a small thing. A curious sideshow for staff on a slow morning, but the videos and numbers spread faster than Tom could have ever imagined. Within hours, someone had filmed the test on a phone and posted it online. By noon, the clip had been viewed thousands of times. By evening, it had crossed into millions. Headlines began to whisper about the janitor who made machines bread heat first. The comments online were split, half disbelief, half awe. People accused the video of being staged or edited. They said no janitor could build something that outsmarted billion-dollar companies. Others argued back, pointing to the raw numbers, and the live demonstration streamed again later in the day. Kate stood next to Tom, explaining the method in calm words while he quietly plugged and unplugged cables, showing over and over that nothing was hidden. The next morning, reporters appeared outside the building, cameras ready, microphones stretched out. They wanted to see the janitor. They wanted to know who had built the pulse. Tom, who had spent his whole life unnoticed, found himself blinking under bright lights. He tried to answer with simple sentences. "I built it to save waste. It is just timing. It is not magic." But the cameras loved his quietness. His worn uniform, the broom leaning against the wall behind him. Inside the tech world, giants stirred, stock prices twitched like startled birds. Energy companies whispered about disruption. Data center managers stayed late staring at charts. Hardware firms held emergency meetings. An old executive at one of the largest chip makers was heard slamming a fist on a desk, saying, "If this is real, it rewrites the map." Some engineers scoffed, loudly dismissing it as a parlor trick. They insisted nothing that simple could scale across architectures. But the very next day, a university lab replicated the test and published raw data. They confirmed power savings of nearly 15% under heavy workloads without measurable slowdown. The scoffs quieted, replaced by uneasy silence. Investors smelled revolution. Shares of cloud companies dipped as rumors spread that their massive energy contracts might shrink. Renewable energy stocks jumped. Battery makers surged. Companies announced sudden R&D shifts, promising they were already working on similar ideas, but everyone knew the truth. The spark had not come from them. It had come from a broom. Backlash began almost instantly. A press release from a leading chip manufacturer claimed the pulse violated safety standards. They hinted at electromagnetic risks and data corruption. A trade group warned that uncertified devices could cause fires, even though no such incident had occurred. The storm was part defense, part fear. No one wanted to admit they had been caught sleeping. Meanwhile, small startups and independent hackers cheered. They saw freedom. They saw a chance to cut energy bills and extend battery lives without waiting for permission. Social media lit with makers asking how to build their own pulses. Open forums filled with sketches and prototypes. People around the world began experimenting in garages and dorm rooms. Tom read those posts late at night, amazed that something born from his quiet hands was now sparking. Hundreds of others. The company where Tom worked suddenly found itself in the spotlight. Investors calling, executives knocking, lawyers pacing hallways. The CEO flew in from another city to see the device firsthand in a private meeting. Kate and Tom demonstrated again, this time before a long table of suits. The numbers were undeniable. The CEO stared at the box in silence for a full minute, then finally said, "We cannot ignore this bit." The hardest part was yet to come, because acceptance did not arrive peacefully. The established players launched waves of doubt. Media outlets ran stories questioning Tom's background. How could a janitor with no degree outthink The brightest labs. Was he just a front for someone else? Was this an accident he stumbled into? Or a trick waiting to collapse? The pressure built with each headline. Tom felt the weight in ways the crowd could not see. He still mopped floors at night. While whispers followed him, some co-workers looked at him with new respect, others with jealousy and suspicion. Some said he was lucky, others said he was a fraud. Even as the device continued to prove itself, he felt the ground shaking beneath him. In quiet corners, he found allies. One night Kate told him, "You changed the conversation forever. Even if they fight it, they cannot unsee it." And Ben, the night guard, clapped him on the shoulder, saying, "You made them nervous, Tom. That means you did something real." As the week closed, the world had moved from disbelief into a storm of fascination. The janitor's invention was no longer just a rumor. It was a challenge hanging over an entire industry. Could something so small, so plain, truly shake the towers of technology? The answer was unfolding in real time. Tom walked back into his broom closet late one evening, sat before the table where the pulse had been born, and stared at the empty spot where it once sat, now guarded in a lab. He felt both pride and fear. The world wanted his idea, but the world was also sharpening its knives. The question now was not whether the invention worked. Everyone knew it did. The question was who would control it, who would profit from it, and whether the man who swept the floors would be allowed to hold the key to a future that giants had never seen coming. The storm did not fade, it only grew louder. Within weeks, the pulse was no longer just a curiosity. It was a headline across every major outlet. The world was hungry for answers. Politicians spoke of it as a possible national asset. Investors whispered about monopolies, and companies scrambled to claim they had known about timing rests for years, though no one had ever built one that actually worked. Invention began showing up in unexpected places. A small cafe owner in another state built a crude copy using parts from a hardware store. He wrote online that his electricity bill dropped enough in 1 month to cover half his rent. A group of college students tested it on their phones, claiming battery life stretched far beyond normal endurance. In a rural town where power was scarce, a teacher built one for the school's single computer lab, and suddenly the fans ran quieter, the lights flickered less, and children stayed after class just to use machines that no longer overheated. The long-term implications were clear. The pulse was not just about saving a little energy here and there. It was about rewriting the rhythm of machines. Entire industries could be reshaped. Data centers might shrink in cost. Home electronics might live longer. Nations struggling with strained power grids could buy more time. And the climate itself might breathe easier if millions of small rests spread across billions of devices. Tom never dreamed of changing the world, yet the blueprint was unfolding in ways he had never dared to imagine. But with the hope came new questions, ethical ones that weighed heavy on those who looked deeper. If every machine could run cheaper, who controlled the design? If energy demand fell, what would happen to workers in industries built on selling power? If phones lasted twice as long, what would happen to companies that thrived on pushing constant upgrades? Some argued that disruption was progress, others warned that it would create economic shockwaves. Tom was asked to speak on a televised panel alongside professors and executives. He sat awkwardly in his janitor's uniform, while the others wore suits. One professor called the pulse a turning point in human-computer relations, saying it showed the value of simplicity over complexity. An executive warned it could destabilize existing markets. Another asked if giving such a tool to everyone was wise. What if it was misused to create unfair advantages? Tom listened quietly, then said the only words that felt true: waste is a choice, and this is just a way to stop choosing it. Meanwhile, society itself began to change. In subtle ways, schools encouraged students to tinker with timing and rhythm the way Tom once had in his youth. Environmental groups praised the invention as a new weapon against energy waste. Families with limited incomes found hope in devices that lasted longer without repair. Tom's broom closet story became a lesson told in classrooms that innovation could come from anyone, anywhere. Yet darker ripples spread to patents were filed by companies that had nothing to do with Tom. Attempts were made to buy the design out from under him. Some offers were kind, some were ruthless. Shadowy threats hinted at lawsuits, others whispered of accidents waiting to happen. Kate grew worried, telling Tom that giants would do anything to reclaim control. This is not just about an idea anymore, she said. It is about who owns the future. Tom stood at a crossroads. He could hide the design to protect himself, he could sell it and disappear, or he could release it openly to the world, knowing it might spark chaos as well as hope. The choice kept him awake at night. The broom closet felt smaller now, not because of its walls, but because of the weight of expectation pressing him from every city. On evening, he walked home in the rain, the streets glowing with neon and reflections of headlights. He saw a child tugging at his mother's sleeve, pointing to a billboard that displayed his face alongside the word innovator. The mother shook her head and said, "Even a janitor can change the world." If he refuses to stay silent, Tom felt tears blur the lights because he had never wanted fame. He only wanted machines to waste less, and yet now children were repeating his story. As a lessened long-term picture grew clearer every day, the Pulse was not just a gadget, it was a seed for other inventions. New companies formed to design complementary tools, algorithms that matched the rhythm hardware that enhanced the rest's entire research fields blossomed around the idea of synchronization. The broom closet had cracked a door open, and now the world was rushing through it still. The tension built the more society embraced the invention. The more dangerous the pushback became. Rumors swirled of government interests, secret labs wanting to weaponize the technology, whispers that it might even be banned in some regions, under the excuse of safety. But behind all of it lay the same truth: giants were afraid of losing their gripdom. Found himself caught between praise and pressure, hero to some, nuisance to others, and still every night he returned to that quiet closet. Because that was where it all began, where the broom leaned and the notebooks waited. Where he reminded himself that he was still the same man sweeping floors. The world might be spinning faster, but in his heart he knew the invention's purpose was simple: to make things breathe. The question now was not whether the world would change, it already had. The question was whether humanity would embrace that change with wisdom or twist it into another tool of control. Tom watched and waited, knowing the next steps would decide if his humble pulse truly brought light, or if it would vanish under the weight of fear and greed. The world had already changed because of Tom's invention, yet the deeper change was not in the machines but in the way people began to see where ideas could come from. Classrooms across the country spoke of the janitor who turned scraps into a solution. Children were told that innovation did not always wear a suit or hold a degree. It could come from hands that swept floors, from eyes that noticed what others ignored, from patience born in silence. Adam never claimed to be a genius. He told every reporter the same thing: I just saw waste and wanted to fix it. But his humility became its own kind of lesson. People realized how quick they had been to judge him when he carried a broom. No one had asked what he dreamed about. No one had thought to see him as anything more than background. Now those same people wondered how many others were being overlooked right now. The boy fixing bikes in an alley, the girl sketching machines on the back of grocery bags, the retiree tinkering with wires in a garage. The phrase "lessons from the broom closet" began to spread, first as a headline, then as a movement. It became a call to action in universities, in workplaces, and communities, asking people to look closer at the overlooked, to listen more carefully to those who had been silenced by circumstance or class or expectation. One magazine printed a photo of Tom's tiny closet with the caption, "This is where the future." Tom himself remained simple. He kept working his shifts. Though the company begged him to take a higher role, he said he liked the piece of sweeping floors. It gave him space to think. But he agreed to speak at schools when invited, not about circuits or crystals but about patience and watching, and the courage to believe in your own small ideas. He told students, "I did not know I was smart. I only knew I wanted to try." While debates raged in boardrooms and parliaments about ownership and patents and profits, but ordinary people carried a different message. They said, "The broom closet taught us that value lives in unexpected places, and that gatekeepers of knowledge could no longer claim the right to decide who gets to invent." Kate once told a group of engineers during a conference, "You know why you missed it? Because you were too busy looking high up the tower, while the answer was waiting in a supply closet. You ignored the janitor. You ignored the rhythm of waste. You ignored simplicity, and that is the real disruption." The world cheered because she was right. Heaven critics softened some who had once mocked. Tom admitted publicly that they were wrong. One professor wrote an essay titled "The Humility of Innovation," where he argued that Tom's story should change how we measure genius, not by titles or paychecks but by impact and imagination. For Tom, the greatest lesson was more personal. He realized that his silence had been both a shield and a prison. For years he hid his notebooks because he believed no one would listen. But once he finally showed the pulse, the world could not look away. He began to tell others, never bury your idea just because people do not see. You never think your place decides your worth. Broom closet became almost a shrine. Reporters filmed it, schools visited it, employees left small notes on the door. "Thank you, Tom. You changed my life." One night Tom found a child's drawing taped there. It showed a man with a broom standing beside a glowing box with words written in uneven letters. "Even janitors can change the world." He kept that drawing folded in his pocket for weeks. Whenever the pressure of fame grew heavy, the broader message echoed everywhere: innovation can come from anywhere. The world started asking uncomfortable questions. How many voices have we silenced because they did not fit the picture of success? How many ideas died in closets, garages, kitchens because no one bothered to look? The broom closet reminded everyone that brilliance wears many disguised sins. So the lesson spread: simple but powerful. Listen more, believe more, and never dismiss The quiet ones, because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds the key to change the world, had wrestled with Tom's invention for months. The noise of lawsuits, press conferences, and shifting markets filled every screen, but through all of it, the pulse kept proving itself. It saved energy, it lowered costs. It gave machines longer lives. No smear campaign, no corporate fear could undo the plain numbers. Finally, Tom made a decision, one that silenced both supporters and critics. He stood before a crowd of reporters, engineers, and students and announced that he would not sell the pulse to a single company. He would not bury it behind patents or lock it in a vault. He would release the design openly for anyone to use, improve, or copy. He spoke with the same quiet tone he always had, saying, "This belongs to everyone, not just me. It was born from waste. It should be used to end waste." The announcement rippled across the world. In hours, universities downloaded the design open source, communities built cheaper versions, farmers attached it to irrigation systems, small shops wired it to freezers, parents installed it in children's laptops, governments, once skeptical, began to promote it as a public tool. Entire economies felt the shift as energy demand softened and people realized how a janitor's simple box could move billions of dollars without a single law passed. Pushback tried to hold, but it collapsed. Companies that resisted were left behind. Those who embraced the pulse thrived. Research blossomed around it. Soon new technologies were born, timing-based processors, rhythm-aware software, synchronized networks. It was as if the pulse had reminded humanity that machines could live in harmony with silence. Instead of fighting in him, did not chase fortune, he stayed in his uniform, sweeping floors. Though now the halls went quiet when he passed, people looked at him not as background but as the man who proved that genius hides in plain sight. When asked why he never left his job, he smiled and said, "The broom keeps me honest, the closet keeps me humble. The work keeps me thinking." In time, history books wrote his name alongside inventors who reshaped eras, not because he built the most complex machine, but because he proved that innovation was not bound by wealth or titles or walls. His story became a mirror held up to the world, asking everyone to look again at the people they ignored. Children grew up hearing about the broom closet innovators of the future, carried that lesson with them. Companies changed how they hired, valuing not just polished resumes, but curious minds hidden in unexpected places. The janitor who once blended into the background had become a symbol of possibility. Years later, when Tom grew older, he returned one last time to that closet. It was no longer full of mops and buckets, but of memories. He ran his hand along the wooden shelf where the first pulse had sat. He thought of all the nights he spent alone, whispering doubts to himself. He thought of the laughter, the disbelief, the storms, and the triumph. He smiled not because he was proud, but because he knew the truth. The world had learned to see what it once refused to see, and so his story closed, not with wealth, not with glory, but with a lesson carved deep into the heart of humanity, that brilliance can rise from anywhere, even from a broom closet, that the quietest voices can carry the loudest truths, that innovation is not about where you start, but about never stopping. The janitor's journey ended, but the pulse lived on, humming gently in the background of a new world, proof that sometimes the smallest idea can open the largest door. End.